Okay, so this is a recording. I'm sharing the current slides. Share. So as I mentioned, we have 4 chapters for the final exam: chapter 5, 6, 8, and 11. So let's start with chapter 5. In chapter 5, we discussed port scanning. We said it's a kind of an enumeration or the first step in the attack life chain. So this is mainly to collect information. What type of questions I may ask in the exam? If I give you a network architecture with some computer machines and IP addresses, I may tell you how would you collect information and do port scanning, let's say, on this target. You may tell me I will use ping, IP address, nmap, some maybe flags with the target IP, etc. Something that you have seen, something similar to what you have seen in class. I may ask you true false questions. I may give you some commands and you may tell me which one is the right, which one is not right, which one makes sense, which one doesn't make sense. I may give you a scenario to elaborate on it. I may tell you how you plan your ethical hacking experiments. You went to a on-site to do a pen testing for Etisalat. How would you do? What are the steps you will take, right? What would you do first, second, third, fourth, five, right? You just give an overview about the steps that you may do to do a pen testing from, for example, planning, checking what are the requirements, what are the tools, selection of tools, communicating with the right people to give you access to the database, to the data, to the servers, to the list of the IPs, run the experiments, right? Test for, let's say, vulnerability for password security strengths, test for cross-site scripting, buffer overflow, you name it, SQL injection, anything that you may know. Then later providing reports, right? Give evidence, recommendations, how to solve the problems, etc. So these are definition terms. You probably know what's port scanning. You should know some names of tools that you have used. We haven't talked about many tools. In the lab, you have used many tools. You can use the same tools that we have discussed in class. I won't ask you what's the port number for SSH or so. I may give you, for example, multiple choice answers. If I tell you you're checking, let's say, an HTTP server, you need to know it's maybe on port 8088. It's not on maybe a DNS port. So if the port is very well known, you should know it. For example, HTTP, maybe a DNS, FTP, SSH. These are very basic. I mean, 5, 6 ports, very well known. So you better know how to use that. Guessing the operating system, we've done it in many tools like Nmap. We've done it to test the operating system to check. I may not tell you what would you do to check the packet flag if they are off or not. So I won't tell you, but you should know, for example, 2 or 3 types of scans. If I give you examples of TCP-based scan, which one is a TCP-based scan, which one is not, you may need to know. If I tell you UDP scan, it's among the TCP scan, you say, yes, this is false, right? TCP scan could be XScan, Connect scan, SYN scan, these are all TCP scan. Because you set up connections in TCP, remember. Tools, again, recall some of the tools. Some tools are very generic, can be used in any applications and so. Remember name of tools like Nmap or ZenMap, whatever you have used in the lab. If I give you a scenario with IP addresses, use them. Don't tell me I will ping this computer machine. Write the commands like here. Command, put nmap, put ping, put traceroute, put, I don't know, all the commands that we have played with, right, to achieve your target. I won't expect you to memorize all the flags here. You cannot. No hackers will memorize all these types of flags. These are other example of OpenVAS. You can, if you remember how you used it, you can elaborate on some scenario you've used OpenVAS for a certain purpose. Ping, you know what's ping, right? We have used it, I believe. Fping, how we used fping. If I give you a scenario, check the available IPs on the network. This is a network range. You can write an fping similar to this command. Even if you don't put all the flags, if you put fping with the network range, that's fine. I won't expect you to put -G, -R, -L, etc. Or hping, can give examples. Hping, fping. These are tools, right? Scripting, if I give you a script, something like this, you may tell me what's the output. Okay, you need to briefly what's the output. Doesn't have to be perfect. If you do some typos and so, no problem. But the output should make sense. Okay, so, and I won't tell you to write a bash script. Right? If you're good in bash scripting, you may write it, but I won't ask you to write a fully fledged bash script to produce something. Okay, because you need computer to do that. Fine, that's chapter 5, very generic on port scanning. We move on to chapter 6. No, you don't have to be familiar with all the tools, but it's good to know at least one tool that does specific task. One type of tool. It doesn't have to be two or, yeah. You don't have to memorize, but if you have already done some labs, you probably know the tools, right? Questions? Chapter 6, enumeration. It's like a continuation of chapter 5, but with more elaboration. Okay, this is getting much more information on the network, on the directories, shared files, shared users, login information. Again, if you remember some of the commands, you can use them, like nbt. Or I may ask you, for example, nbt scan is a command to do NetBIOS check. You may tell me yes, true, right? True and false questions. Or I give you a command with this output. This is an output of an nbt scan. You may tell me whether it's true or not. Same thing. I give you a dump sync, Hyena, Nessus. You have used Nessus, OpenVAS, SNMP walk. I may tell you whether this is for Linux or for Windows. You may tell me whether it's true or false. These are, for example, Linux commands. Finger for Linux or Windows, it's for Linux. We haven't talked too much here in chapter 6. And again, it's kind of a continuation of chapter 5. Yes, not all. But you need to know, if I tell you a task, you need to know how to achieve it with some commands. And it's something that you have seen in class. I'm not gonna tell you, give you a scenario that you have never done in class. Okay? Questions? Chapter 8. These are vulnerabilities on desktop, operating system, full screen. You know what's vulnerabilities, right? You cannot memorize vulnerabilities. I'm not going to tell you what's CVE 8, 2024, 5667. No, I may tell you what's maybe SQL injection attack. You may tell me multiple choice answer, whether this is an SQL injection attack. You may know what's CVE. File system, FAT, and TFS. It's good to know what's FAT, what's NTFS, the difference between them. RPC, remote procedure call. NetBIOS, NBT stat. If I give you also true and false, NBT stat is used for this and that. You may tell me whether it's true or false. SMB. LoveTrack. I may tell you LoveTrack is related to SMB, packet inspection, and so you may tell me yes, true. Null session, why it's targeted by hackers and used. Some NetBIOS vulnerabilities, enumeration tools like NBTstat, NetView, NetStat, Ping. You can memorize one. IIS, what is it? Why it's Microsoft, right? This is Windows. SQL Server can be for Windows, can be for Microsoft, for Linux. How you can target SQL, how you check for vulnerabilities within SQL. Typical vulnerabilities against SQL or the SQL injection attacks. Tools for Windows, like MBSA. You can mention any tools that works in Windows to find vulnerabilities, because the vulnerability scanners in general take the target as an IP or domain. If it's an IP, if it's a Windows machine, it will do vulnerability assessment for a Windows machine. If the IP is Linux machine, it will do vulnerability assessment on a Linux machine. Example of MBSA, the type of information that can be extracted. Best practice. Always, if I tell you this is a problem, you need to propose solution at the end. And all the best practice can be used. You may tell me I would do pen testing, I will do security testing and audit, I will do patch management, updating, upgrading. These are all good practices that you can mention in your solution. But when you elaborate, don't mention just the terms. Give me examples. I gave you a scenario of a Etisalat Windows server. You may tell me I will go on the Etisalat server in this room. I will look into the vulnerabilities on Windows 2008, right? Based on the description, elaborate on the answers accordingly. Okay? So link it to the scenario. Your answers should be linked to the scenario. Don't be very generic. Okay? You get more marks if you give me more details. Antivirus solutions, how it can be used, how it works, what type of attacks can be detected with antivirus, mainly malware, right? Reviewing logs. These are all good practice. Installing an antivirus to protect against malware, reviewing logs to check any illegal activities, to do digital investigation in case of computer crime. These are all good practices when you want to enhance the security of operating system. Remember, this chapter is about operating system. Disable services that are unused. No need to enable them, right? If you don't have a website, just disable the website service. If you don't have a database, you can close, for example, the MySQL ports. If you don't have MySQL database, so anything that is not used can be turned off. How would you check whether the port is used or not? You know how. Maybe through Nmap, right? We check the default Nmap. If you put Nmap, the IP address, it will give you the open ports by default. Some other security best practice You can elaborate on any of these. If I give you mention three, you can mention any of these. And these are all, I mean, common sense. For example, careful default permission. If there is default permission, just maybe disable it or change the default permission. Let's say the guest account is always, they log in automatically with the guest. Just go and disable the default permission of the guest. Disabling guest account. This is the last one. Filtering at TCP IP layer. Maybe we throw a firewall and filter the packets incoming, outgoing from the TCP, UDP, ICMP packets. Naming, passwords, security. I mean, these are all best practices. Checking whether a WordPress exists, you can just add WP admin to check WordPress comes from WP comes from WordPress. This is a platform to host websites. So if you want to check the website is running WordPress and attack it based on WordPress vulnerabilities, you can just add WP admin to any website. Awareness works everywhere. This is an answer that you can use it everywhere. Whenever I propose solutions, we can mention training and awareness. This always work. Keep up with emerging trends, learn what's there, what's in the market, what type of trends of attacks to defend accordingly. Adding policies, if there's any weak passwords or blank passwords, you can just disable them or change them. On Linux, vulnerability is similar to Windows. All the good practice in Windows works for Linux. Some tools that can be used, again, if I tell you Samba is a platform for Linux or for Windows, you may tell me it's Linux-based. I'm not going to tell you what are the CVEs for Linux. No memorization on the CVEs. OpenVAS, if you want to use it to find the operating system, running services, vulnerabilities, severity of the vulnerabilities. So screenshots from OpenVAS. How you check for malware, softwares like Keystroke that can do harm. Trojan is a malware, right? So for you, just use generic word like malware. That would be enough. Rootkits, checking for rootkits. What's rootkit? So these are more threatening than typical malware because they work at a low level against operating system. Awareness, updating the system. Check the configuration of the operating system. This is, again, are good practices within Linux. Awareness training, update, secure configuration. So majority of the good practices and vulnerabilities that target Windows are the same that targets Linux. The difference is the tools that you will use as a hacker. Some tools are applicable for Linux, some others on Windows, etc. Questions? Yes. Yes. No, you need to have an idea about majority of the vulnerabilities. If you go through the lab 3, we mentioned many vulnerabilities on web-based. So if I tell you a web-based attack, mention 2 types of web-based attacks. You may tell me SQL injection and maybe cross-site scripting. You should know how they work briefly. No details, no coding. How SQL injection works. If you give examples, of course, it's added mark. Okay? You have done one experiment on SQL injection. You can just explain how you've done it. If you write the commands, you do it. Even if it has typos, no problem. But at least I know you're talking about SQL injection and you are attempting to writing a command. Okay? Types of attacks. The types of attacks, like what? Where? DDoS?
Yeah.
DDoS attack, you should know what's DDoS, right? The types of DDoS attacks. Where did you see that? Here? At the beginning? Let me check. This has nothing to do with DDoS. This is a tool called Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. It's kind of a security testing for Windows. It checks several components within Windows, like the IIS, the updates. It checks the SQL server. It checks the applications, the password strengths, etc. Questions? The last chapter is 11, which was discussed last week. Full screen mode. What type of questions I may ask? So this is a hacking course, so majority of my questions will be more on hacking, not on how technology works here, how the story will work or so. Yes,
So last class we mentioned the game.
yes.
We need to
No, no, we're not playing games here. So no need to know how the game works, right? We're more interested into the hacking on wireless. So anything related to vulnerabilities, attacks, solutions. You know what's an SSID, right? I'm going to give you a scenario that has vulnerabilities or weak points. Let's say a company has created a default. They have an SSID of Linksys. You should know that this is the default SSID. Linksys is a brand, right? So you may tell me the solution. This is the vulnerability. You need to identify it first. And second, the solution is what? To change the default SSID name, right? You mentioned that I would change the default SSID name to something else. So characters, numbers that are unknown, random. I may tell you also that they are using WAP as a authentication mechanism. You may tell me, oh, WAP is not good practice. This is another vulnerability found in the scenario. I would need to use WPA2 AES encryption. Okay? Stuff like that. So I'm going to give you a scenario with some maybe misconfiguration, vulnerabilities. You need to identify them in the text and tell me what you propose as a solution. Okay? You're using a weak password that has not been updated for 3 months. You may tell me, oh, this is a vulnerability. They should update it maybe on a monthly basis. The broadcast, the SSID is broadcast. We will disable the broadcast. Default SSIDs, that's a weak point, right? If I give you something like this on the security parameters, you need to know, for example, here they're using an access point. It's called Coco, and they are enabling the broadcast. You may tell me this is a weak point. Maybe they can disable the wireless broadcast to make it invisible to hackers who are scanning the Wi-Fi and, for example, war driving attacks. Here, I won't expect you to know all the families of IEEE 802.11, but you may, when you see, if I want to ask you a question about CSMA, I will tell you this is a carrier sense multiple access. So obviously to manage how multiple user access from its name, the Wi-Fi. If I tell you collision detection, collision, it means the signal is doing collision on one access point. How you do the collision, how you manage the collision. Collision avoidance, how you avoid the collision. Means multiple user accessing the same access point. What type of questions? I may not tell you what's the speed of 802.11 and what's the bandwidth for 802.11b or N and G. You cannot memorize that. You may give me an example of application that works on specific radio frequency. I may tell you, for example, during COVID, we used infrared technology to detect vulnerabilities, not vulnerabilities, I mean, COVID cases and high temperature within a human. True or false? Again, speed, and so not required to memorize. And number of channels, of course not. But it's good to know, for example, web is not secure. And what are the authentication or decryption mechanism on the wireless that are more strong and more reliable? So if I may ask something about, let's say, 802.11n, I will explain it. I will tell you what is it. I will tell you. This is, for example, for solving the issues that happened in the previous version, enhancement of the 802.11g with the bandwidth of... I will explain if it's required. Again, here for mobile broadband, you can explain a similar scenario. If I give you something related to 802.20, I will explain. So this is for mobility. And so you may give me an example. Not for memorization, the table. Authentication is very important. It's good to know what is it, how it works. Some standards, basic concepts, these authentication mechanisms. You need to know which one is more secure than the other. Okay. And the way we move forward, the way we get more security. So some algorithms are enhancement of the previous one. If I give you an image like this, you may explain it. How, for example, a user will be authenticated to the network, how the Radius authentication server provide him an approval to access the service or access the network. And which is basic, right? Moves from this one will ask the access point to have access to the Radius server. The Radius service will provide either yes or no for the access point. The access points allow the supplicant to go and access the service on the authentication server. And the authentication server could provide a service, for example, internet access, playing a game, accessing a website, connect and download files, any application. Web is not secured. Stuff that are much better than web, WPA2 AS is good. You can mention it. If we mention that a web has been found in the scenario, you may tell me this is a weak security configuration for the wireless. We can maybe change web with WPA2 AS and add also a strong or complex security password, Wi-Fi password. Word driving, we have watched some videos. If you want to know how it works, you can watch videos again. What type of information you can extract by doing word driving. Tools that used for word driving, you can elaborate on them. Kismet, NetStumbler. AirCrack NG, WebCrack, these are all tools that can be used for wireless hack. Countermeasure means defense, protection, solutions. Again, similar to what we have discussed in the previous chapter, I will always propose solutions. Okay, there is a problem. You have identified. What's the solution? What would you do to avoid this to happen again? You found a vulnerability. What would you recommend to solve it? You found, for example, some illegal access, a Wi-Fi that is in open space and it's publicly available to everyone. First of all, you make it secure, you enable security, you go onto the configuration, check the MAC addresses that are available, you can limit it to a specific number of users, etc., etc. Honeypots, fake IP, access points, we have already discussed this. You need to know how it works. These are also solutions to learn and do trap the hackers, to learn more about the attackers. You can give examples of how banks provide fake credit cards online to collect and trace the money to see where the hackers are taking the money and how they are using the money. Also, honeypots on IPs, how you can monitor the activities. If someone scans your network, you'll be identify him or identify these illegal activities from the honeypots, where you put sensors, let's say, and monitor the activities of hackers. Okay, these are good practices. Consider using EAP, have an authentication server, training and education, because this works everywhere. Firewall, disable DHCP, make it manual, disable broadcast, change the SSID default name. These are all good practices. Questions? Yes. Yes.
Do we have to know the example of each one?
No. No. If an example has been provided in class, yes, you can explain it. For example, I will tell you the 802.20. It's related to mobility, mobile. When you move, when you are, let's say, on a call, moving from one city to another, how the connection will be there. I will tell you what type of attacks you may encounter in these types of scenarios. So anything related to hacking these types of chains. Other questions? Okay, so the questions that you will have, multiple choice, true and false, short answers, long answers based on some scenarios, diagram with some images and IP addresses, and scenarios where you need to tell me what would you do to achieve your goals and your task. Similar to what we have done maybe in labs, lab 1, lab 2, lab 3. You can use the same tools in the right scenario. I will try to give you also sample exam questions. I will upload it on Moodle and share it with you to get to know what is it about. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording and yes. Yes, example of questions from the chapters. Okay.